lights all over. We've got some data flowing into the ether, at least across the Ethernet cables anyway. Good, it looks like we're reasonably live and fairly low latency today. That's very nice. Right, today is OLC CodeZone episode 53, selecting tile groups. I don't think we'll get that far, but it's a no glasses percent run. You may notice I have something missing, which means I'm going to be coding like this for the rest of the day today. So you might want to sit a bit further back from your monitors than usual, and we'll get started. Channel's here, Maget's up here. Nobody has shouted first yet. That's very good. Ultra zoom. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I'm not that blind, but you'll see me blinking and squinting and all sorts of things. I've left them downstairs. It's too late now. Right. So, apologies for the shift in start. Yesterday I was I was going to do it, but then real life kind of just got in the way, and it was a bit late notice, I know, but I had to abort. So it's I guess it's the price you pay for maintaining a population of the planet. What have I actually been working on? We're not going to do any jam stuff today. Jam stuff was a couple of weeks ago. There's still some time left to do some rating in the jam, and some of the entries have changed as well. I've actually not shut them down, so people have been making mods and fixing bugs. If you can work out which ones that might be, and there's a couple of new entries in there, a few late submissions too. Pliskit, hello, yes. So, what have I been working on in terms of the editor? Because that's what we're going to look at today. And I thought it's time to start doing some more visual stuff. We've been doing a lot of sort of theory and a lot of background boilerplate, and I appreciate that that's not always the most entertaining or interesting thing to see. We need to get to the point where we start drawing things. And herein comes a bit of a problem. I'm that kind of programmer. I just want to get to the crux of it. I want to be fun, scribbling about, making dummy levels and experimenting with that. But the problem is, in order to race to that finish line, I'm skipping loads and loads of stuff. And I've realised that this project's growing arms and legs all over the place of unfinished ideas, if branches that don't go anywhere. I just found one down here, for example, because there's something I've got to put there. But I keep saying to myself, do you know what? I'll put that in later, because right now I just really want to see the end result. And that's part of the reason I undertook this project, is a little bit of self-discipline to actually sort of methodically grind through this part of it, because I feel once we get this bit really solid, the rest will start to just sort of flow naturally. When a project starts to code itself, you know you're onto a winner. A quick look here, just a second, because I've not got my glasses. I have to sort of squint. Danny was first today, was he? Fulbian, hello. Sorry for not submitting an ambitious project in the Code Jam. I could make it in a few weeks. That's okay. Don't worry about it. That's the whole point. What'll be cool, though, is after the Code Jam is finished, get on the Discord and submit the itch page anyway. In fact, just submit it now. Just go on. You can't submit it to the Jam, but you can probably post it in the Jam chat on the Discord, and people will give you some feedback, if you've finished it, of course. That's quite some indentation you got there. Yeah, it's fairly standard Javid indentation levels. Why is this so indented? It's because, as always, working with 2D stuff, you've always got this first level of indent, haven't you? Which then makes everything seem worse than it really is. And actually have a third loop in there. We'll talk about what's going on in this code later on. But before we get to sort of doing the visual bit, I'll run it. I'll show you what we're looking at today. The application's starting to sort of become something real. I can't interact with it, and I was hoping that maybe tonight we can get some very basic interactions going with it. But what I wanted to get going was sort of the marching ant selection thing. I posted this on the Discord over the weekend, to sort of show where I was at. And there's two types of marching ant thing. The first, if I just pull up Affinity, this is the one where everybody's familiar with. You sort of see in Photoshop. I don't know if you'll see it on the stream, but there's a very thin line of black and white lines. Oddly, in Affinity, I don't know why, sorry Affinity devs, I love all your stuff, but it has got a few interesting quirks. It does look like they've got an off by one error in their selection masks, because it just doesn't appear down one edge of the screen at a certain zoom level, so there's something to think about there. But this is, as you can see, it's sort of screen invariant, and I think that's fine for an art package. When you're working with sort of 2D assets, I want it to be big and bold where the edges are. So I'm undecided yet. We'll see. Where whether we go with, well, as you can see, individual lines, or do we go with big, daft, bright pixels like mine? I like this approach. And getting them to sort of flow around the edges as well, I think was quite nice. Oddly, and you might see them stop occasionally, that's because at the moment I'm only redrawing anything on mouse events, which saves a lot of CPU hassle, but for things like this I might need to have an intermediate ticker that just goes, you know what, go enjoy yourself. Go enjoy yourself. Go enjoy yourself. Maybe every half a second or something like that. Yeah, Amagetsu, I thought that too. mine actually follow a particular direction. If you had noticed, on outside edges they go clockwise, and on inside edges they go counterclockwise. It's quite nice, huh? It's irrelevant. It wasn't intentional, and it kind of fell out of the algorithm. And we'll discuss the algorithm. But what I did sort of load up as a screenshot on the Discord, and I'll try and recreate it here, is that the whole thing is starting to kind of come together. But as I've just said, we're missing loads of like odds and ends and validations and checks, and I need to get those in. So maybe not this week, but the next week's stream might have a bit of a boring element to it. Sorry, that's what great marketeer I am. So if we go to the asset pack, we haven't loaded up any assets at all. Let's load something in. So there's a standard asset. Let's load another one. The two sprites. So this is what I created on the... Oh, hello. Oh, Starfleet clone. Oh, thank you very much, man. Oh, it's always good to see you. Yeah, not usually I do these things on Wednesday. We're going to be showing off some Visual Studio features I'm willing to bet nobody has ever used tonight. We'll see. What sort of, where am I going with this is, well, if we create a static tile source, which was the other fundamental type that we've created, which we need to populate with an asset, so we'll go to our asset selection tool. So it's nice that we can do all of this stuff built in. We'll do that. And let's create another one, resource, add a static tile source. So things like that. It collapses the tree every time you add something new. I need to sort that out. So that's the one we just got. Let's add this one. Let's give it the other asset. Mega sprite. We can go away and sort of populate all of the parameters to make them look proper in this case. But let's say now I'm going back to my level select, and I wanted to draw tiles. Well, this is how I intend to do it. It doesn't work yet, but this is the intention. Is that actually you just exploit the fact that you've got multiple windows now. And we've got a working sort of environment for grouping. And so you would just sort of select the tiles from a given window and draw them into your level using appropriate tools. And that's a discussion point that we probably need to have tonight, because there's nowhere currently on the screen is there any room for tooling. And now we've got some tools like select. We need to start adding that in. And it'd be smart enough that if you then selected some data from this source, perhaps that's what it would go and paste into. Notifications are still as loud as hell. Excellent. They shouldn't be. I'll tell you, I'll dial them down a little bit. I like the notifications anyway. Just you gets them. Visual Studio's debugger resets a watch item when array enlarges. Okay. So that's ultimately what I'm kind of looking at this sort of thing at the moment and thinking it's coming together. I don't want it to be some sort of hand-holding tool for absolute beginners to start drawing things. That's not its intention. Its intention is to be a fairly sophisticated 2D editing environment. And it's making sure that this groundwork is done before we get stuck in. So one of the things I think is always important in these sort of tools is a selection tool. And in this case, I've got a tiled array. Now, if you remember, we had in the last episode, we looked at how we did tiles. And I created a tiled layer of the type Boolean. In fact, it wasn't Boolean, but it was an integer. And we would colour some of the tiles red and some of the tiles green, depending on the value. So this would be a generic Boolean layer in my 2D editor. And I think it's important that you can actually mask things with a selection. Selection is going to be used probably in quite a few of these different windows. These ones can't handle it yet. That one's really annoying me, that static tile source up there. So if I select a static tile source and just put the tiles to be the right size, these sort of things play on my mind. So that should be 32, and that one should be 32 as well. That's better. Oh, that's better. Fortunately, I can't see the grid on that one because we've zoomed out. Oh, no, do you know what? I'll just put that back over there. So I think it's important to be able to sort of select areas and perhaps even save those selections, particularly when you want to, say, take all of these booleans and maybe copy the whole layer of selection into another layer of something else that we'll undefine later on. You're welcome, Standard. It's not just me then. Yeah, I need to work on actually saving stuff. So that's what I'm saying. We keep skipping over all of these fundamental points, and it stops it from being sort of a usable application. Because I'm too excited to get to the core bits that are entertaining. It's starting to look a bit like a tool, although it doesn't function at all at the moment. Right, so I think before we get stuck into the sort of selection aspect, it's time to revisit something quickly I mentioned in the last episode, and I made a mistake, which is not uncommon, but the problem was I had something called a tiled layer. Tiled layer, here it was. And tiled layer, I'd been dead clever about. I thought, you know what, I'm going to have tiles of all sorts of different types. I'm going to make a template out of this. And it worked. I demonstrated that in the last episode. Until, and maybe some of the C++ real aficionados here will jump in. It was all very good until I wanted to start abusing polymorphism. And I can't do that with templates readily. So I needed an intermediate layer, and it started making me think that actually the class construction of this project is getting a little bit complicated, and perhaps we need a bit of a refresher. And if you didn't know, and if you've installed Visual Studio properly, you can actually view the class diagrams for your project. So we'll just blind everybody there. There we go. So this is the class diagram for this project. We can have a look around. The navigation of it is terrible. I'm sorry, Visual Studio people, it's just awful, because you'd expect to be able to pan and zoom like in any other application. It's just not like that at all. Mouse wheel scrolls up and down. I have to hold Control to sort of zoom in. You can see it gets a bit janky, the zoom, for some reason. And actually panning around, I've not worked out how to pan sort of in this environment yet, so you have to use the scroll bars. So hang on, catch up with a few of the chats. Starting to look a bit like a tool, but doesn't function at all. Yeah, Londo. I get that feeling. Herbal Dance, hello, nice to see you. Alt scroll, it might be, it's just, I don't know, Alts, no, not doing anything. Control and, no, Control and, no. It's just, it seems like an afterthought. I guess the intern that did this bit thought nobody would ever use it, so why bother? A bit like me and my tool right now, right? You keep missing out these little bits that are important. So I thought it'd be useful to just quickly have a look at this, because there'd be some people that haven't been following along sort of intently, and as we're still sort of in the boilerplate phases of things, it might be getting a bit confusing. In fact, it might actually be easier if this was in light mode, because I can see it's even coloured certain things in the dark. So there's a few bits and pieces with this which are a bit of an afterthought. Looks a bit complicated. Oh, hi Johnny, by the way. Looks a bit complicated. Is that some semi-UML? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it is. It's like a basic UML. Desp4, hello. Yeah, I tried controls and shifts and things. Oh no, graphs. Wish I could get that with the classic, with the classes in my dynamic type code. It's painful to move about. All right, yeah, it is. You can actually go. It's quite a powerful tool, really, when you dig into this. But anyway, so I thought we'll have a look at what this sort of structure of my project is. Now, it's sort of just also gone splat with the classes. Now, I don't blame the tool for that. That's a difficult problem to solve. It doesn't know which are the important ones and which are not. But it does do some interesting positioning. I think the actual positioning algorithms are really cool, and I'd like to explore that myself, because what you can do is you can pick up one of these cells and you can drag it somewhere, and it all kind of works, and it jumps over properly, and it does the things that you want it to do. And then as soon as you right click and go sort of layout diagram, it forgets it all and puts it all back again. So you can spend ages sort of positioning it and then think, right, go and update, and it doesn't actually maintain sort of anything. If it just maintained where you put the root classes, perhaps, that would be a useful feature. But what I wanted to demonstrate was actually, as you can see, there's quite a lot of types and classes going on in this project. Now, most of them aren't that relevant. We can go up here and have a quick look at sort of all of these unconnected ones. These are just like quality of life things. So I'll zoom in enough that I can see the names, because as you can see, this is a no glasses % run of tonight's code zone. So you've got the basic WX widgets things, GFX context. So app is my entry point. GFX context is sort of the thing that wraps the Pixel Game Engine 3 up. In fact, that looks like that should be there, but it's not. That doesn't actually do anything anymore. I don't think there's anything in there now. No, see, that's dead. Oh, see, yeah, if you click on these, you can actually explode them and see what all of the individual items are, and you can edit these things down here. And if you click on them, it'll take you to where they're defined in the code. So as a navigation aid, it's quite useful too. Build your own GNU plot. Is there some law regarding the no glasses that I missed? No, other than I have left them downstairs. And getting them would mean getting out of my chair. The potential you might see some genuine Javid bottom. And it's just, it's time consuming. We'll stay up here and not use glasses tonight. Because you're all assuming I'm actually wearing pants. Right. All of those standalone ones we're not that interested in, because they're just quality of life things. We saw these were the properties that we created for the properties window. Yeah, these are some of the GUI components. In fact, you can make it even worse, because if you go to where was it? We can actually want to display the base classes. Where do I do that? Is it up here? Class diagram. I'm sure there was a function, a clicker that you could say to display all the base classes, which would then sort of explode all of the WX widgets and absolutely everything. You can make it horrific. So it's kind of picking the stuff that's just related to the project. I can't remember where that particular widget is. But let's go and have a look at sort of the editor. We'll take the editor first. Where's the editor? So here's my class? Editor main. So this is our main window, main frame. That's our main application. Nothing really inherits from that. But here's an interesting one. These are our different viewing tools. So these are the ones we've created sort of episode by episode. We created a special image viewer, then we created one that drew a grid on an image, and then from that we also created a grid image view, which you'd suspect would be some sort of amalgamation of the two, but I didn't want to do a multiple inheritance thing here. Maybe the naming's not very clever here, but they do actually do slightly different things. So that's why they sort of different path. This is like a really naive, just does image view with zoom and offsets, but this does a bit more because all the grid selection code's quite important and thrown in there too. I wish I could zoom in the Twitch chat. Yeah, not leaving the man cave, that is a good thing. You could turn off the camera, Alex. Have you ever used OBS? That's not as easy as you think. Right, but let's have a look at these workspace objects, because these are sort of the critical things that we've been working with. Work object. And everything that you can interact with within my editor is actually a work object. So things like the static tile source, the workspaces themselves, these are basically things that we might want to serialize, or things that get, as we'll see in future episodes, things that become scriptable. Scriptable in terms of how do we serialize them. So right now I'm using my OLC data format, but there's no reason I want to use that in the future. I might want to use all sorts of different tooling, different computing languages perhaps, all sorts of different things. And I just want that to be very, very flexible, and hopefully the community can start chipping in, creating some tools to output some of this data. You never know. But this is the fundamental one. We're working with layers in our layered construct work object. And so we have this base layer, and this can then be broken into tiled layer, and we've not got around to them yet, but geometry layers. That's something else to do in the future too. Now I had my tiled layer as the templated type, and that was all very good until I tried to actually use it. And when I used it, realized that there's a major shortcoming here. So to resolve the problem, And you'll see what the problem is when I demonstrate it in a minute. To resolve the problem, I've had to create this tile container class. So this tiled layer, and to be fair, this is now actually genuine sort of object-oriented. It's the correct level of things to be. I'd given too much responsibility to this class. So it was a template, but then also represented everything that was tiled. So I've split that into this class represents everything that's tiled, and this class only represents the bits that are important to that particular type. So it was necessary to do another layer of abstraction there. And I'll show you why. Because I've been working on this layered construct editor window. So anything that's you sort of see in this OLC Edit 2D editor is one of the editing panes that appears with the tab at the top. So this is the sort of user interface component. And the layered construct, in this case, is, let's have a look at the constructor. We pass in, like we do with everything, we pass in the workspace, and for some reason it's called ptile source, which shouldn't be called. I see all these little things I need to sort out. But that would be the pointer to the workspace's layered construct. There it is. It's inside this class. And all this has so far is a set of set selected tiles. And selected tiles are simply a 2D integer coordinate. And I've created some utility functions to select all of the tiles, select none of the tiles, add to the selection a single tile, remove from the selection a single tile, and test to see if a tile is contained within the selection. I've also broken out rendered tile selection mask, which is what's going to draw the dotted lines, the marching ants. Now, interestingly, you might see there's some green text on this screen, and that's not something we've seen very much of. But because I was dipping into this project, sort of having a day on it here, and then 5 days off, and then a couple of days on, etc., etc., I've actually decided to start commenting my code, so at least I understand what things are doing. That's quite novel, isn't it? Have a quick look at the chats. Is the problem inheritance? The problem. I know we get some. I know. I've got to be careful with all these radical new ideas. Now, because it was getting to a point where I'm flitting between project after project after project, and particularly with something like the jam came up. The jam finished, and I finished my code, and I came back to this, and I have just no idea where I left this. So this is my editor so far. Now we'll come back to all of that junk at the top in a minute. But what's important here is that the editing window has its own onRender function. And the first thing we want it to do is render the grid and things, anything that's in the background. So that's not actually the grid. The grid's in the foreground, but we do want to make sure that we actually render the background. Now this function is called polymorphically, so we have to do that manually. We have to get it to draw, in this case, let's have a quick look. Oh, it's building something. You'll see in all of the editor windows, there's this, I can't zoom in on it, I'm afraid. There's this like a pattern to show transparency. You don't want it just black or white or something. You actually need something there so you can see through it when you've got transparent sections of your data. So all of that's handled in that onRender function there. Oh, where's it gone? There. Whilst we're here, what I tend to do, and I might change this later. At the moment, I'm getting the visible world extents sort of manually, and I'm doing this in several different places, which is instantly a sign telling me that I should have this functionality somewhere else. But in order to get the world extents in tile space, I need to sort of invert the affine transform that's going on to transform the screen. Because if you recall, everything now in Pixel Game Engine 3, and this is all Pixel Game Engine 3 behind the scenes, everything runs through affine transforms. So it's all sort of, you can transform it easily. That's the point. But in order to know which tile, for example, is at the top left of the screen here, I need to do this sort of invert affine transform. And what I do is I pass in that coordinate, that coordinate, that coordinate, and that coordinate into the inverse transform, and that tells me where we are in world space in the tile map. And then I can clamp that to the size of the tiles, which we'll see the code doing in a minute. And you can actually see the numbers here at the bottom, pointing at the screen again. The numbers here sort of give me the current viewing area in tile space. So as I pan over, you can see the numbers changing there. The X coordinate moves along. And it'll do that. It'll give me a nice square set of tiles, even irrespective of rotation. There is a little bit of overdraw. There's, I imagine some of these tiles are, so it says still drawing from tile 0 there. Because you've got to remember, once it's rotated, tile 0's kind of up here, right? It's a bit trickier to sort of visualize, but I need to know what tiles are visible sort of horizontally and vertical. So I think there's a bit of overdraw, but it works well enough. I'm happy. It's not the end of the world. So once I've worked out where things are in tile space, I can then work out which tiles I need to draw in any tile map that I throw into this space. Aren't comments essentially future light? Yeah, probably. 1 to 2D Boolean 8, keeping it easier to write than handle a standard set. Possibly. Yeah, it could be. One of the advantages of a standard set is it is kind of like a Boolean 2D array, just by virtue of throwing things in the set. I don't actually have to check anything, and of course it's dynamic in size, so I don't have to sort of resize anything either. It's just this nice little small blob of only things I have to work with. So let's say I wanted to colour everything that's been selected purple. Then I only have to draw purple where the elements exist in the set. I don't actually have to go and iterate across the whole 2D array to find those locations. And I've got a feeling that might be useful for us later on, because I've got this sort of idea for these more complicated brushes, as it were, as we're sort of pasting things around. Set works quite nicely. We'll come back to set in a minute. Let's just finish this bit of tile mapping. So, by the way, those messages that were appearing in the log were happening through our logging framework. So it's finally proving a bit useful to actually help along with some debugging. It's unordered set in this case. Yeah, I think that's what you meant, Magetsup. At least I'm not aware of a unique set. Is unique set a thing? Oh, possibly, maybe. Early in the times of programming, the gods can decide to implement comments. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, unordered. It's unordered in this case. The ordering doesn't matter. It's cell-selected or not. Right, now, things get a little bit sort of safe and modern CE, but this is where things started to also fall apart. You know that I'm storing things as shared pointers via weak pointers, so fine, okay, we lock that, that's nice. We talked about the virtues of doing so. Then I want to iterate through all of the construct layers. Now, the order I'm rendering these is probably wrong. I probably want to sort of reverse iterate through all of these. Draw the one at the back first. But since I've only got the one layer, and again, I'm cutting corners to try and get to a goal, then at the moment it really just draws that one layer. Then I need to do this. So I need to do this anyway, this base layer get type, because I need to cast the layer to something sensible. It's really only, and this is where things can change a little bit, and perhaps we need to think about this. One of the problems I had, I'm just making sure I'm just looking in quite the right selection, right place here. Yeah. When I had the tiled layer entirely as a template, I can't cast it to anything. Standard dynamic pointer cast required me to do sort of everything explicitly. So everything I would add, I'd have to add very repetitive code to sort of explicitly get those types. But most of the time, all I actually wanted were things like the dimensions of the array for that particular layer. So that's why I decided to construct this sort of intermediate layer. I'm just looking for where I'm actually calling this, because I'm not making this up, but I can't actually see where it was being used. I think it was here. So I think the idea is yeah, here we go. Switch base layer get type doesn't need to be like this anymore. I can actually now just call it's tiled. So this is just double checking that it is tiled. And if it is tiled, then we draw it according to how we would draw all of the tile maps. So I can actually take out this specialization. I can't right now, but as I start to add more layer types, I can, and I don't have to keep duplicating this code each time, because I can then just cast this straight to tiled layer rather than the tile container. So it's just made a decision. I made the wrong decision first time around. Realised it was going to lead to a load of bloated, repetitive code. So it was time to sort of scale that one back. Yeah, we could call it a bouquet. So that was the sort of major reason for that change. Also, I think, no, not there. I'm trying to look for where was this sort of more apparent, because it popped up again. And I can't remember where it popped up, but it certainly popped up again. Yeah, here we go. This was it here. Yeah, found it. Good. Right. Tile selection. Let's look at the set, because that sort of explains my problem a little bit more. So we have this set. Now, if you don't know what a set is, it's just a normal standard container, and you can throw things in it, but you can only store one thing of each value in it. So you can store a set of dice rolls, but you can't store like 2 6s, that sort of thing. And it doesn't store them in any particular order. I'm using an unordered set, so it's a reasonably quick container. You can just throw data in, and it doesn't allow duplicates. It doesn't reject duplicates either, so it just doesn't know, right? Which is great for when you're just randomly, haphazardly selecting cells. If they're already in your set, you just select them again. It doesn't matter. You don't have to do any checks. So it takes out a lot of faff in that regard. Yeah, I grew up with Hyacinth. That was like a reality TV show for me. That's why I'm using a set for my selection. So let's have a look at some of these functions to select things in a set. We'll look at the really basic ones to begin with, because they're easy to understand. But it's a standard unordered set, and I'm simply adding to it my coordinate of the selected tile. I'm using the inPlace function to do so. Easy. Removing. Again, I can just pass in the coordinate and remove that coordinate. Remember, there's no duplicates, so if that coordinate exists in the set, it just gets rid of it. If it doesn't exist in the set, it's fine. Who cares, right? It doesn't matter. Yeah, I think it saves doing all of the checks, and it might not be the most computationally efficient, but it just it handles it for you, and that's the whole point of code we use. So, contains, yeah. Does a particular cell exist in our set? Well, we just check. Now, I could use these things directly in the code, but I thought, you know what, let's wrap them, remove the settiness from them, and that way, if we do change the implementation in the future, at least there's an interface for it. But the tricky one becomes, select none means we don't want anything in our set. That's clear the set. That's very simple. The tricky one becomes add all the cells, and that's what you need this big function for. So the big function here is if you want to select everything, which is kind of your default state in an editor. Remember, you want to be able to edit everything at all. You basically have to then go and add every cell's location to the set. So the set becomes, as Standard did mention before, it becomes sort of a big array of all the cells. They'll be out of order. It'd be actually quite interesting to see or visualize the order, see how set works sort of algorithmically. But that aside, there's just this big glob of coordinates which represent every single tile in the image. So again, we go through, we lock the construct layer, we look for the particular layer we've got selected at the moment. We can only have one, of course. And then I check, is it tiles? So this time I don't actually care whether the layers are Boolean or numerical or char or graphical or hexagonal or whatever, it doesn't matter. I just know it's a tile. And so this then allowed me to do just a simple cast to tiled layer. So even though I've got all of these fancy template types for the very leaves of my my tree of layer types, by sort of encapsulating everything that encompasses a tile in this tile layer class, I can actually do that cast. Remember, I'm using standard dynamic pointer cast because I'm using shared pointers in the background, so I can't just use the regular sort of dynamic cast function. And this works very nicely. So now I've got my tiled layer. I'm starting a new selection, so I just clear the set and I iterate through all of the X and Ys and simply add those one at a time. There's probably a far more elegant way to do that by adding a big chunk of data in one go, but again, it's user interface based. Nobody notices if a function takes 10 milliseconds or 12 milliseconds after a mouse click. So you've got that little bit of sort of overhead to play with. And I thought, you know what, let's add some error messages as well. I mean, that's a novel thing. Error messages. Look what happens if it doesn't work. It tells you an error. There's nothing you can do about it. It just tells you it didn't work. But you know, maybe that will throw up some problems in the future. Sorry if I'm squinting and looking at the microphone. I'm just trying to read some of the Twitch chats. I wonder if somebody is working on a Lua binding for PG. Yes, people have tried. The downside was it was horribly slow. Fundamentally, if you're not bothered about the per pixel access, you can actually do it very quickly. So you're just sort of leveraging PGE to do all of the decal and GPU stuff. Fine, that would be working quite fine. But still, a lot of people like to draw a pixel and draw a circle and draw a line and all of that sort of thing. And because PGE sort of instinctively does that pixel by pixel, that required a lot of shifts going back and forth from Lua to C++ land. And so it just didn't work very well at all. As long as their lookups iteration is faster than... So thank you, Standard. Sorry, I hadn't read. Yeah, I wasn't just reading what you just said, but at least we're in sort of an agreement there. Exactly. It really doesn't matter, and that's part of the beauty of doing some GUI coding as opposed to game coding. Is you do have that sort of, do you know what? Let's just make this work elegantly rather than make it work really, really quick. So that's what we see. Now, I don't currently have any way of sort of mouse interaction yet going on with this, so I've had to construct my tile thing. My tile selection sort of manually. And so to do so, I select everything, and then I am selectively removing some tiles from the set, just by specifying the coordinates straight away. And you've already seen this, but that's what it looks like. And now I chose this particular configuration because I think it gives me sort of an insight to make sure that my edge highlighting is working quite well. Now I've added an additional border of tiles. I don't know if I like it or not, to sort of designate that that's not selected. Now, I can do things about this. And this is where I wanted to talk about the marching ants algorithm. I like marching ants because they're big and bold and clear. But the way that I've implemented this allows us to have sort of other patterns as well if we wanted to do things. Now, if anybody's thinking that this is like mega clever, how we get this effect, you're going to be in for quite a shock because it's really, really not that clever at all. And I will demonstrate what we've done. I've learned a lesson from the jam regarding the mega texture. Don't worry, I'm not using the mega texture, but regarding sort of indexing sprites based on their location. So if I pull up my art studio here, I created a map like this. So the tile in the middle is the selected tile, and if it was selected in isolation, you'd have these sort of boundary images to it. Now you can see here, this is a nice gradiented image in this case. So I thought that'd be really cool. If I make it white, I can make it pulse and glow and that sort of thing. And I did, and I didn't like it. It was just too jarring for me. It started to look a bit too much like a computer game rather than the computer game editor. And also because I'm not using sort of screen scale invariants, as you zoom in, they became quite big. Now, I don't expect in my editor anybody's sort of going to zoom into this level. It's just never going to be that way. But it did occur to me that things like tile sizes could become quite high definition, in which case your big blocky edges look a bit strange against the high definition tile. This is all still to be tweaked and worked out. However, so I tried this sort of glowing approach first. Yeah, I wasn't sold on it. So instead, I decided I'm going to do sort of some black and white dots, and then I just decided, well, I'll just quickly animate 4 sets like this. Now, what's important and why does this work? Is I can make sure that these corner ones, if I've got this vertical edge and a horizontal edge, and they overlap, that you don't sort of get a big group in the corner that's more dense, or else you'd start to see all of these little pulses along the side of the image. So it's important to choose a graphic which actually is kind of corner invariant, and these ones kind of are. Oh, let's ignore that one. I thought, oh, let's double it up. Let's make it really obvious. I just didn't like it at all. So yeah, I've not decided what this is going to look like, but at least the technique is robust. And then I can just, because I'm looking at this, it's a very simple tiling. I don't need all of, like we did in the jam, there was like the map had like 32 different potential tiles that could be used. There's only really 8 tiles here that can be used. So actually logically it's far easier to work out. Now have a look at the code for this. Here I'm loading the 4 images. Now you might recall that in PGE, loading an image is just it's a one-liner, really. It's not quite the same in PGE3 at the moment, because I've not sort of made that elegant. But the ordering to this is that you load the file into the sprite. So this is a sprite object, an OLC sprite object. Then you create the resource on the GPU, and then you transfer the data from the CPU to the GPU. It's a bit different, a different way of thinking about things. This will all be wrapped up in when PG3 gets released as a single header file. You won't notice any difference really, but it allows us to do some interesting things with the graphics behind the scenes. Yeah, no glasses percent is starting to sort of kick in a bit now as I'm sort of blinking more intently at the screen. So let's have a look at this little algorithm here. Right, this is a beautiful function. Look at that, everybody, right? Yeah. Look at that. No, none of this standard chrono nonsense. Get rid of that rubbish. This is what we need. WX get UTC time in milliseconds and get the low word of it. I thought that was beautiful. I think, well done, WX widgets. You're doing it right. So what I wanted to do was every quarter of a second sort of iterate between the 4 different images that I've just shown. So that's my animation, and that's all that happens. It doesn't matter how much time, but I just look at what is this number, how much time has elapsed since the epoch. I look at the bottom 32 bits of it, because this whole thing gives me something, I don't know, 60. It's a long. I don't even know what a long is. What's a long? WX long. What actually is that? It's a long native. Well, what exactly is a long native? Oh, peak definition. Go on. Oh, hang on, it's complicated. Oh, this is fascinating, isn't it? Let's have a look. What's a long native? Long native is actually... Oh, let's get to the bottom of it. Where is it? I'm looking to just see something like... there's the high and the low, so I'm guessing it's a 64-bit something. ABS too long. Where's the actual sort of... the word? Where's the data? Private. Long T. There we go. We got there in the end. So, peak definition. What is a long T? It's an int64. In fact, it's an int64 for intrinsic style, isn't it? Is that right? Magetsa will double check that one and correct me later. Underscore int64. So I'm guessing that's a Microsoft int64. What's wrong with Chrono? Exactly, Alex. See? Apologise if there's nothing inappropriate on any of my output. There's no stupid questions. I'm learning C, about to start with pointers. What exactly is the size T type? It is the size of the thing. So let's have a look. Go back to here. So if I have... Well, size T typically is built into your compiler to be sort of the longest unsigned integer that your computer will support. That's my understanding of the definition. Yeah, it's long, but it does actually vary. So right now in my 64-bit build, it's long. If I change this over to a 32-bit build, I believe that should actually change size. Yeah, it becomes a regular unsigned int. Now that catches people out, so that's the first thing to worry about. So don't ever assume if you're serializing this information, if you're writing it to a file, that actually it's going to be the same between builds. Fortunately, we don't have to worry too much about 32-bit builds anymore, unless it's in script and in the browser. Pixel 8 game engine devs. So it's more of a convenient compiler placeholder. It's just one of those things that exists in C. I guess it's convenient because you know that a lot of the things that are implemented in C++, a lot of the algorithms of the standard library will use size t to store an integer when it needs to be unsigned. And so it's useful for storing things like how big is a vector, how many elements are in this array, that sort of thing. Because on a larger system, on a 64-bit system, of course, you can have more. So you need a bigger numerical type. Fundamentally, though, it's just an unsigned integer. What's wrong with just using these things? Well, because that feels a bit rusty and smells funny. So yeah, there we are. Thank you, Magetsu. Isn't size t the size? Well, exactly. It's the largest sort of integer your system can sort of sensibly handle. Size of t equals size of void star. Yeah, I don't know if that actually helps explain to somebody that's just learning pointers, but yes, it fits to the register. I don't know if that's true actually. If it fits to the register, only because having done a little bit of processor design, registers are lies. So I think there is actually there's an ABI abstraction of some description which is recognized here in size t, but the size of a pointer, I just like it as it's the largest sort of unsigned integer primitive that's sort of natural to your system. Diversion aside. Anyway, what a beautiful function, hey? Because if we had to do this in standard Chrono, I'd still be typing it. I started this code on Sunday, and I'd still be going on with it, just typing out the namespaces. But so this gives me a tick every quarter of a second, fundamentally. It doesn't even have to be accurate. Again, it's GUI stuff. It doesn't matter, right? If it misses one, who cares? Yeah, processors are a little bit more complicated than that. Well, like I say, so there we go. That's what I'm saying. So you start getting like all of these weird things, and there's actually sort of combined combination registers and registers that share other bits of other registers, and yeah. Anything fits in a register if you push it in really hard. Software CPU implementation. Oh, exactly. Yeah, exactly. No clue. That's the right way to think about it. Processor's not big enough. Code a bigger processor. Download more RAM. So, right, we're doing some checks for these boundary conditions. It's much simpler than it was with the auto map. I have nine cells to look at. There's sort of a 3x3 matrix around my immediate cell. Cell 4 being in the middle. So we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's not helped at all, has it? Me waving my finger around. I'll ignore that. So I get the middle cell, and then I get the immediate north, south, east, and west, although this time around it's south, east, west, and north. And then I get my northwest, southwest, northeast, southeast cells. And if I'm in a position where my cell, the one in the middle, has a northern neighbor, for example, and a western neighbor, then I don't want to draw the northwest corner, because then I've got the horizontal part, the vertical part, and that little joining nugget in the middle, whatever we want to call it. So I don't want to draw the little joining nugget. So that way, I can create a set of bools which sort of identify what my immediate neighborhood actually looks like. Last week I learned a bit of forbidden Git knowledge. Oh, good. Yeah, I'm notoriously on the Discord, so I've sort of abandoned Git. I don't like it. there's very little about. I actually am using Git for this project, but I on the whole, I've given it up. I've even at work we have moved away from it. We just decided it was just too risky. I know this is incredibly common. I'm going to regret saying these sort of things, but it's too easy to damage if you don't know what you're doing. And I guess there's arguments to, well, why do people do not? Well, most people, when they start using Git, don't know what they're doing. We had a few instances where people came in, upset the repo, and actually we lost development time trying to go back and make it all work. And we decided, you know what, it's happened twice. It's got to go. What do we use then? We actually just use we use OneDrive. Well, our works equivalent of OneDrive, because it does sort of versioning sort of intrinsic to itself, right? So every time the file's updated, we've got a version history of it. We can go back. It doesn't handle all of the PR stuff and all of the merging stuff, but we don't need that. Yeah, I mean, the world sort of moved beyond typing in code to do things. That's what I used to do back in the 80s. Now I have this thing which I can sort of click and make things happen. Right, so I checked to see, first of all, this is where it's going to get confusing. I'm not even going to attempt to try and decipher the logic here, but you can see it's got all of these inversions in various places and negative signs. And why have I started south, east, west, north when normally everybody would do north, west, east, south? It's because when you look at this image, effectively, even though this is the cell we're checking, we're always checking from the opposite direction in reality to work out what we want to draw. Because you're always drawing on the cells that are outside the selected cell. And so this required a bit of logic to sort of get around the inversion. So that's why there's some curious things going on there. But once I've got my array of booleans, I can then go through all 9 cells. I know where the location is in that image because I can take the index of those 9 cells. That's easy enough to work out my y coordinate, work out my x coordinate from that single number. And then just draw that appropriate texture on the screen in the correct location, and that's it. So that's how I'm drawing my my marching ants. So I know there was a handful of people thought there might be something a bit more clever to it than that, but that's really it. But the end result is quite nice. Boot it up, make sure I've not made any changes. You see, I used SVN for 10 years, and there were occasional frustrations with it, but on the whole, it worked very well, and it was very easy for me to deploy our installed application via SVN to our clients. Because SVN just didn't care, and you could tell the client, right, go and download Tortoise SVN, enter these credentials, and you could give them sort of some sort of different levels of permission, so they couldn't actually change anything. They could just sort of get the application, but it was done in a controllable way and a loggable way by us, and they could hop onto our server, download it, and they're done. I quite liked that. PVCS. Oh dear. I did actually. I did for work. I did sort of have a read through Mercurial as a bit of an alternative. I was just looking for something that was meant to be a bit simpler to use, but ultimately I thought, what's the point? We've not got that many devs. We're not a huge software house or anything like that. So it just ended up being this thing that just got in the way. And then nobody would ever quite understand when to do commits. So you'd have some commits after a single function is added, and then you'll have some commits when like half the project has been completed, and have a commit because there's a typo somewhere, and yeah, couldn't be bothered. Yeah, I think what Git can provide is brilliant. I do actually like that traceability, and I do like the fact that it's designed for sort of this collaborative effort to work together. But I think Standard Int, you've hit it on the head there. It's just a bit too complicated for what it's trying to do. Right, so we're going a few minutes left, but basically we've talked about the selection, we've talked about the marching ants, we've talked about the project structure, but my major concern, which is what I raised at the start, is we're getting a lot of loose ends, things that are just not being finished. So I now need to spend some time really wrapping this bit up, making sure that we're not going to have bugs that come and haunt us in 5 or 6 weeks' time. But I think also I'm going to get very close to starting to needing some tooling. Now, I've had to programmatically add in this selection. That's no good. How do I actually handle this? Where am I going to put these tools? So I was thinking probably I'll have a context-sensitive toolbar that needs to exist within the layered construct window. And that the different layer types, so when we go down here, so let's have a look at our tile container type. So this was our templated type. Potentially, this could also elicit some information about what goes into that toolbar. We're starting to get to the real sort of fun questions to answer, because yet I've no idea how we're going to draw a cell of a sprite sheet into our map. I don't recognize yet how that relationship happens. What represents the cell in the map? Don't know. Got other decisions to make. But there are some common tools. So the selection stuff in tile maps, they're common across all tile maps. We're going to want things like drawing lines, maybe, of particular tiles, drawing circles, filled rectangles, obviously, and potentially user tools too. So perhaps certain scripts get run and can do things like, as mentioned a few weeks ago, something like a what's it called? Wave function collapse, perhaps something like that could be externalized rather than internalized. And so it's about now structuring the information in the project in such a way that that information is available to some external tooling. So I expect over the next few weeks we'll start to see some rather large jumps in sort of complexity. And that's why I'm really keen to get some of these sort of very simple, trivial matters sorted out now, so that we're not worrying about them in the future. I think so, anyway. That's where we're at. The first rule of Git is not to touch each other's branches. Yeah, that's easier said than done, particularly in small teams. Yeah, I think it's fine when you've got like a code base of 1,000 files and you've got 50, 60 devs working on it. The chances of 2 devs working on the same bit are smaller. But when you've got 100 files and 3 devs working on them, chances are you're going to have devs working on the same bits of code. You should make those corners so that the ants don't overlap but would move diagonally. I did think about animating it that way. But yeah, do you know why I didn't do that, Magetsu? It's again this silly little OCD in me. I quite liked the fact that in all stages, let's go back to the original one, there's only ever 4 black and 4 white cells. Oh, ignore that one. Which I thought was cool. I don't know why that's so when I drew it I thought, oh, that's really satisfying. Yeah, would Breslham's line algorithm be any useful? Of course it would. Yeah, exactly, for doing sort of our line filling stuff. Now that's a slightly different tool. So whereas we've been looking at selection tools, selection will probably actually take a bit of a back seat when we get into the drawing of things. Selection really just works as a mask. So I'm trying to think of the bigger picture of what we're aiming. Let's say you're drawing a village. You might want a selection layer saved somewhere which represents everything that's not houses. And that way you could just draw all of the background with a different shade of grass or whatever. Ideally, you'd construct your houses on on a different layer entirely, but I'm just trying to come up with a tool which is flexible enough to handle all of these situations. And I know that selection has proven useful in the past. Let's say we had a selection like this and we wanted to wave function collapse fill this area. Very complicated, but potentially that might be something that you want to do. I think it's a useful thing to have in the toolbox, and it got me to a point where I was starting to draw things again, which is what I needed to do. But the next phase will be to start adding in some actual drawing tools. Now, this is where things get complicated. So let's say I want to draw a line. Well, I've got my Boolean layer here. So what colours do I draw my line? I've only got true or false. So I need to somehow have a palette that represents what that tool can draw. And that palette is linked to the data type. So let's say when I have my floating point data type, then the data that it can draw is a number, a real number. So I need to have some means of actually inputting that information and making it flexible enough that it works with other layers. So there's still some design decisions I need to make on how that's handled. Because what I don't want to do is have like hundreds of different options at the top of the screen. I'd rather it be some sort of context-sensitive menu system. I think that's always a bit more elegant, particularly when you want to just really focus on the design of what's going on and not on how it's all constructed behind the scenes. Yeah, do you have a concept of integrating third-party code in? Yes, I do. I've deliberately sort of not talked about this, but we can have a brief chat about what the plan is. It's all going to be Lua, right? Because it's what I know. It's how I use things. So fundamentally, what will happen is for all of the individual things that you create, all of these different layers, you'll be able to right-click on and export. And I've envisaged a window that's going to pop up and give you a selection of scripts that are compatible with that particular layer stored on the machine. It'll give you a preview of the output data as well, because I think that'll prove to be invaluable. And you can either copy it from the preview, or you can just save it to file. So if you wanted to save it as a JSON object, you'll need to look at the API of how I'm exposing that information, but you should be able to sort of output that in any way you want. The drawing tools are a little bit different because they need a slightly different set of information. But I imagine that they'll be loaded sort of, I don't know if I'll do it dynamically in real time, but they'll be loaded on application start, perhaps ready to go. So that's why I quite like the idea of having something like WFC sort of externalized. But it made me think, why shouldn't everything should be externalized at that point, right? So even flood fill, if somebody can come up with a better flood fill given the API, fine, let that be. What if you want a flood fill that's sensitive to certain borders and not others? So suddenly you start needing all of these customizations. So it's going to be Lua. It's what I know, but I'm making sure that the interfaces that are exposed to the Lua are reasonably simple. What I won't be doing, and I know this will cause some division amongst the Lua community, it'd be very easy for me to put everything as a massive big table and say, there you go, Lua guys, there's your big table full of stuff, have at it. Actually, I'm going to reduce it to simple individual value API calls. So your Lua function will be doing a lot of transactions with the C++ code, only because I think that visually makes things a bit simpler, and it makes things a lot more controllable from my perspective too. We use DevOps and Git in work. It does work. You do end up with commits on commits. Yeah, it's it's mentioned Git. It's just not for me. Although I do use Git for these things. It's fine. Right, I think that is our hour. Yeah, sorry that it was on a Wednesday. I say real life kind of got in the way. Starting to look like a tool. I think one thing I'd like to just finish off before we start tidying some of the code up is some basic interactivity to work. So you can see the coordinates do actually pop up. We sorted that out a few weeks ago. But it's now sort of getting that information back into this construct editor in order to start manipulating the layers that are being selected. But you can see right now, selected layer doesn't even do anything. Nothing pops up in this this properties window. So that's something to work on next. And with that, I wish you all the best. I will see you next week. Tuesday, hopefully 8:30. So everybody take care, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.